I'm Coach Dave. Welcome back to Coach's Corner.
Come on.
Welcome back. Coach Dave McDonough, Coach's Corner podcast. Today, I have a man today. Man, he's been in the boxing business probably, I know, longer than me. I got Billy Calogero from the Billy C Talking Boxing Show. We've been going back and forth. You can see him on Facebook, other platforms out there. Great boxing guy, has worn many hats, and we appreciate you taking the time out, Billy, coming down here, being on Coach's Corner. We've been talking back and forth, and it's great to have another boxing aficionado in the room.
I appreciate you having me 100%, and I can talk boxing, that's for sure, you know.
And you know, the funny thing is like, you know, we had to cross paths somewhere at some point in the game, talking to you and you being involved in many different shows and everything else. And, you know, being a local guy, what was the lure that brought you into the boxing world?
Well, I would have to say as a kid, first as a fan, you know, watching Muhammad Ali, Sonny Liston, those were my guys. But a fight specifically that I remember was Ali fighting Jimmy Young. And I remember Jimmy Young, in my opinion, knocking Ali from ring post to ring post in that fight. And Ali got the decision. And I remember turning to my uncle, who was watching the fight with me at the time, and I said, how could he have gotten that win? And that's when I learned, the unwritten rule in boxing, you got to knock out the champ. That all changed with Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler because boxing's never been the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you go back to Ali, the era of Ali, and the heavyweights that were in that era was just, you know,
phenomenal.
You had to fight to be number one heavyweight at that point. It really, not to take away now because there's just so many divisions and so many, you really had some tough opponents and oppositions at that point.
Think about the names. You know, Ernie Shavers was a good friend of mine. He used to do a lot of stuff with us. But you had Ernie Shavers, you had Ron Lyle, you know, George Chuvalo. These weren't even champions, you know, but they would be champions today, you know. And then, of course, the names everyone knows, you know, the Ali, Frazier, Foremans, etc. But they say that that era was probably the best heavyweight era, aside from the James Jeffries, Jack Johnson time. You know,
well, you know, we're going back to hardcore boxing fans, right? Because, you know, we grew up in the era of ABC, right? So you got to see these guys. There wasn't all the 20 million cable channels, stream service. You got to watch the fight on ABC.
On Saturdays.
On Saturdays, right? After the fight. It usually wasn't live.
No.
Usually it was a week after. They had it at a closed circuit in some places. I remember you talk about Glens Falls. I remember them closed circuiting fights out of Glens Falls Arena all over. The Felt Forum always had a closed circuit. Mm-hmm. But, you know, you had to glue to your TV, listen to Howard Cosell, and watch the fight after that. Or listen to it on radio.
Well, yeah, you talk about radio. I have the I'll go off topic, but I have the recording of the Joe Louis Max Schmeling rematch, where Joe Louis knocked him out, and it's a bone-chilling recording if you listen to it. It only lasted a couple minutes, but thanks to the late great Steve Lott, who was part of Big Fights Incorporated, you know, he gave that to me. He also was the one that gave us the rights to rebroadcast some of those great fights that we did on the Boxing Revisited series we did. But those fights, you know, the game is different, you know. You mentioned earlier about all the titles. You know, to me, that's what has ruined the sport in a sense because it's diluted. Everybody's a champion. There's more people that walk around. I mean, look at the fight that just happened this weekend. I'm not taking anything away. I mean, I was wrong with my prediction, but the Wardley Joseph Parker fight.
Yeah.
I mean, kudos to Fabio Wardley. But since when does a guy who really only had one win, and that was against Frazier Clark, who wasn't even an established fighter, and really that was his biggest win going into that. Now he's going to get a fast track to Usyk.
Now, if you look at that fight, right, and you look at the people in attendance, the heavyweights that were in attendance that are not getting the shot that Wardley got to fight Parker.
That's my point. That's my point.
You know, you had Dylan White in attendance, okay? I know Big Baby Miller, his name is back in. I'm probably missing guys over there. I watched the interview. There was like 5 or 6 of them there that had better records, you know, that you would think they're going to get the fast track or the shot to fight. And, you know, look, my hat's off to Joe Parker because he's been on a hot streak.
I'm shocked that he lost, especially with his resume. And like I had said, and I'll talk about tomorrow, but he either did one of two things, in my opinion. He either took Wardley lightly or the mileage finally caught up with him. Let's think about how many fights. You know, he's been in with the top guys. Who else has fought the level of opposition that Joseph Parker has?
In the last 2 years, I mean, you know, look, I was in camp with Deontay Wilder when he was getting ready for Parker. I did not expect Deontay Wilder to lose to Joe Parker leaving camp. When he left camp, Deontay looked sharp. He did not fight the fight that he trained for. I don't know what happened, but my hat's off to Parker. Parker beat Zhang. We were in camp with Zhang when he was getting ready for Parker. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's the mileage. Maybe it's everything else. It's definitely. But is it the Joe Parker that we saw previous, up and down?
I don't know.
Yeah, you know, but my hat's still off to the guy. He made a run. I don't think he's totally out of the picture. And honestly, I want to see if Wardley could fight. I really do.
But does he deserve a title shot?
I don't think so.
No, you know, he should be okay. The name, if we're talking heavyweight division, current heavyweight division, the name that everyone seems to avoid would be the guy that, if in a perfect world, if we wanted boxing to get to the point where the guy who beats the guy who beats the guy, Ajit KBL should be the guy.
KBL, yeah.
You know, that should fight Wardley. Then the winner of that fight gets the shot at Usyk. That guy has beaten everybody too, you know. And
he's not a mainstream, you know, and his promotional company doesn't fall under, you know,
Matchroom or
money
right.
moving the fighter, right? And you know what? Let's talk about this for a second, right? And we'll get into a couple other things. I got to ask you this. Being with your experience and seeing that you're around, and I've always said this, right? We talk about other sports that are, you know, the best fight the best.
Yep.
Or the best play the best, right? You're in the top 10, you play the top 10 teams, you get the number 1 ranking. We don't seem to find that in boxing. We seem to, okay, what's the flavor of the week? Oh, well, we got this guy and this guy. Let's go. Okay. I don't think it'll ever happen. I go back to the Super 6 tournament with Andre Ward and everybody else. Was an exciting time in boxing. Loved at the talent.
It took 2 years to do.
Yeah, but look at the talent that came out of there. Look at some of the fights that we saw out
Agreed.
of there. Right? You know, and we have 20 divisions. You know, if you hit the lottery tomorrow, you could start a division in boxing.
I could.
You know
I could even
mean?
be a champion if I paid for a belt.
That's right. That's right. So, you know, we got a lot of factors there. But let's go back to you wearing you start off, what was the initial start in boxing? Now, you know, you got the bug because to me, boxing calls us. We don't just find it. It's a calling.
All right. Once you get bitten by the boxing bug, you're done.
Yeah.
You're done. I think what I did was I became a fan, and before I started my show, which we were now that I look back at it, you know, after 22 years, we were a pioneer. I mean, in our heyday, we're nothing the way we were, you know, 10 years ago in terms of viewerships and stuff. And what had happened was I got involved. I wanted to figure out a way I can be ringside without having to buy tickets. So I started writing. I started covering fights. And I created my own website. I had an idea of something, and it took off. And I started, you know, covering fights. And from there, I went to being involved with management of fighters and then ultimately promotion. And then we did the show when I had a gym in Poughkeepsie, New York. And we were trying to figure out a way to promote the gym. And it was actually my cousin who said, hey, there's this new thing. It's called podcasting. Yep. Why don't we do a podcast? And I said, podcast? What's a podcast? He said, well, it's sort of like radio, but we'll use it. We'll get on the radio. And I said, well, maybe we could use it as a promotional tool for the gym. Hey, we're doing a live show out of the gym. Come join, be part of it. And that's how it started. And we did one show 1 week. And the week after, we got picked up by sports. At the time, it was called TPS Radio. And it was all internet stuff. And we were doing a weekly show, 1 hour. Then we got to 2 hours. And then it went to a daily show. And then we did our morning show. And it just took off. And we ended up becoming, we self-syndicating. So we went on all these radio stations. We were on 36, I believe, throughout U.S. and Canada. Yeah, but in hindsight, we should have stuck with the podcast because the podcast is what took off. Right. But we landed some deals. We were on a couple of fight TV networks, and that was when it was great.
So you just couldn't stay away from the management end of boxing.
No,
so, and you know what I mean by where I'm going with this, right?
I do. Look, I couldn't stay away because everybody wants to be involved with a world champion, and I too wanted to be involved with it. But as we were discussing earlier, a lot of people don't realize the game. And, so I find a couple of young fighters, and next thing I know, it's just a money sponge because, the fighters want to get paid, and then, they don't understand a lot of times that, and a lot of people don't understand that the opponent in the beginning of a fighter's career, probably for the first dozen fights at least, generally is making more money than the other guy, and that was a problem, and fighters, unfortunately in this business, as somebody talks sweet to them, and next thing you know, you're battling for fighters, and now you have to have these contracts that are written so well.
So it's funny. I saw a post on a contract from Don King, and I'm not going to name who the fighter was, but it was what King took out.
I know the post.
Cost. You saw the post. It was like $28,000 for the fight. It was $100 a day to use King's training camp, front money. This, that.
Plus, he was charging him for something that the fighter wasn't supposed to pay for.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, yeah. But, okay, so I'm a little biased with Don King. And the reason why I say this is because you hear all the negative stuff, like what we saw on that post. We all heard about the $1 million towels that Mike Tyson paid for while he was in jail. The thing with Don was that Don was open with the fighters. Like, the thing that got a lot of fighters, and Larry Holmes was one of them, Norton was one of them, where he offers them money. This is what I'm going to pay you. And Don's shtick was he had a briefcase full of cash. And this is what I'm going to pay you. Here's half down. And the fighters would sign and walk out of that office with half the money.
Signing bonus, yeah.
What they didn't like, and what we hear years later, is when that kind of stuff comes out. Oh, well, he made $10 million. I only made $1 million. He ripped me off, or he charged me for, right. Well, my argument has always been, look, the time to negotiate is before you sign the paper. You can't cry. In other sports, they do it too. You look at football, a guy signs a 3-year deal for $5 million. He's in year number 2, and the guy next to him signed a 3-year deal for $10 million. Now he doesn't want to play anymore, but he signed his deal,
I agree. So, like, I had a fighter who signed with Don King, and I think the lure was, before where we are today with promotional companies, and Don King was the man. If you wanted to be a champion at that time, no disrespect to Bob Arum, but Don King was the man. You had to go through him.
Don King was a promoter. He made you feel as a fan that if you didn't watch this fight, you were going to miss out on something. We don't have that today.
No. And to get back to it, it's like, I agree with you. Fighters are their own worst enemy, right? Until they're ready to jump ship. Then they know everything, right?
Everything.
They don't look at contracts, right? Listen, all they know is the dollar sign in the contract. Then they sign the contract, right? And then 2 or 3 years later, somebody who knows how to read a contract goes, "Hey, Billy, what the hell did
What'd
you
sign this for?"
Right? So, you know, I had an old contract to Don King for a fighter, and I said, you know, you're probably still under contract, and if your kids fight, he's probably got them, bro.
Right.
But you know what? I looked at the contract, and I said, you signed this? I'm not a lawyer, by no means, but I'm like, there were 5 things in there. I'm like, you got to be out of your mind.
Yep.
But you know what? Don was a promoter. He made fights. He made some of the greatest fights out there. You know, he promoted the sport. And, yeah, we don't have that today. You know, Eddie Hearn, as good as he is with Matchroom, is not a Don King.
No. Well, what I think has evolved is that the fighters are forced to promote themselves. And what you see is all that trash talking online. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get you in the ring. I'm going to do that, blah, 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 blah. And none of that happens. So it's an anticlimactic situation. And then the fighters are hugging and kissing at the end of the fight. So, I mean, all that hatred that they were spewing was all for publicity, which I get. And, you know, we go back to Muhammad Ali. He perfected that, you know, the trash talk, but he backed it up.
Yeah.
You know, he backed it up. You know, a lot of fighters today.
Psychological warfare. Ali, I often say this today, not to cut you off. What would Ali be worth today as an athlete? He'd be the highest paid athlete out there with his personality and the way he carried himself.
We can't put a number on it, because if Floyd Mayweather, you know, made $1 billion for fighting, you know, basically the second half of his career, cherry picking every opponent. Muhammad Ali didn't do that. Could you imagine what he would have? I couldn't even imagine what Ali would be worth. And he wasn't even the first trash talker. I mean, way back in the day, Benny Leonard was known for talking trash to his fighters in the ring and everything else. Even Jack Johnson, you know?
Yeah.
So it's just how they do it today. I don't know. You know, getting back to the fighters today and what you said earlier, they don't have to climb the ladder. And we were talking heavyweights before and Fabio Wardley getting a shot. What about Moses Atuma?
Yeah.
One big fight. And I dissected his resume. He hasn't fought anybody. How does he deserve a fight, a champion, a title shot, versus these guys that, and you see it every day in the gym, guys busting their ass in the gym, trying to get better and wait for that opportunity, and they don't get it because they don't have the money behind them that somebody else
the right
does.
people, the right promoter.
So how long does it take for that fighter to say, screw this? And that's what's happening.
I think look, the fight game is hard, right? You know that. You've been in it a long time. You've seen it from many, many different angles. We have kids today that, not to take away from them, but to be a fighter is hard. To be in the gym every day, it's not football, it's not baseball, you know, where you're playing once a week or a couple times a week, or basketball. You get to go to practice and then you get to play. Like you said, you know, you got fighters that could train every day, maybe fight once a year, then they don't fight again. You know, and then you have to recycle it back up.
Well, let's take that point. Now, I'm going to ask you some questions.
Yeah.
Let's take that point, because back in the day, and I get this argument all the time, and I don't mean to keep bringing up Mayweather, but he started it in a sense because, you know, he claims he beat the most champions and all of this stuff. But back in the day, the fighters fought more often. They didn't spar as much. So my question is, do you think that the fight, so in other words, like Sugar Ray Robinson, let's say, he would fight 3 times a month, 4 times a month. You know, he's fighting once every week or so, once every 10 days. They weren't all knockout, drag-out fights. Maybe one every 3 months was that big fight, you know.
Right.
But he was making money the whole time.
But
do you think,
to your thing real quick before, those fighters were fighting. That was a career choice.
100%.
They were fighting like you got up in the morning to go work your job. That was their job.
It was a trade.
Yes.
And I say this all the time, Dave, because back in those days, a kid walks into a gym and the trainer would look at him and, I want to fight. Yeah, well, you sweep up the floor first, So he hangs around the gym for a bit. Then they put the gloves on him. Then he fights amateur. Then he turns pro, whether he becomes a champion or not. And when he's done being a pro, he becomes a trainer or he becomes a manager or he becomes a promoter. He's a boxing guy that stays in the business. Today, all you need is one thing, a checkbook with money in it. And you could be whatever. And I say this all the time. I've done a lot of things in the sport, but I've never been a trainer. And I've never claimed to be a trainer. But guess what? I can go pay the $25 or $50 fee for a commission and not only be considered a trainer, I could be the head trainer for a fight.
Right.
And you know that. And that's not
this is our sport, right? Look, I was not a fighter by no means. I had 3 amateur fights. I don't claim to be a fighter. And I was not good by no means. I love the sport. I played baseball. The reason that I gravitated to boxing was there were no gyms. So we had a family friend who would train me in a boxing gym, and then obviously you're hitting the bag, you're moving. And I always loved the sport, right? I was blessed to work with a lot of big people in the sport and break my cherry, carrying a bucket, keeping my mouth shut.
Yeah.
Nobody handed me a set of pads and said, hey, go hold pads for that kid or give him advice. No, you had to earn your passage.
100%.
And you earned your passage around guys that were already earned their passage. You already know that. So and because you come from the same generation, you didn't say anything. You just listened. If they told you to do something, you did it, you listened, and you were there because you loved it, right?
Yep.
You loved it. But getting back to your point, yeah, this sport lets anybody else in. You can't go on the sidelines. If you had your son or a kid, right, that you represented and who was an NFL player, you can't go down there and coach him.
No.
You're going to say, get the hell out of here, right?
Yeah.
Boxing match, just what you said. I'm working the corner.
Yeah, here's my money.
Yeah.
Here's your credential.
I want Billy in the corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Billy sells insurance during the week. What the hell is he doing here
exactly.
today? Okay.
He stayed at a Holiday Inn Express.
You know what I'm saying? It's like,
100%.
right? And the boxing gyms are there. To your point, to even add on that, right? Boxing people. We're losing boxing people. We're losing the generational people who've been in the sport that can pass knowledge, whether they were fighters, trainers, managers, cut men, people that were in the gym. That generation's going.
We have rah-rah men now, Dave. There's very few good trainers that I say trainers/teachers that are teaching the kid. One of the most frustrating things for me when I watch a fight is the lack of instruction when the fighter comes back to the corner. And we have the luxury of hearing what they're saying,
Mm-hmm.
And how many times do you hear a so-called trainer telling their fighter, listen, he's hitting you, he's catching you with that left. You got to avoid that. Well, tell him how to avoid it. Give him more information than what he already knows. It's very frustrating for me to watch and listen to that. And then the other thing is, these same guys are standing up in front of the camera. We're going to do this. We worked on this. We're going to do that. We have a game plan. We. Then the fight happens. They lose. And it's, well, he didn't do this. He didn't do that. The we becomes he,
Yeah, and you're 100% right. Look, there's a handful of really good trainers out there right now that need to pass that knowledge down. So, if you talk about the Wardley fight, if you watch Ezra Cannon in the first fight, Malik Scott worked. So I've happened to be around Malik a couple of times in camps, and I think he's one of the better trainers out there. Not to take away from anyone, but he's a teacher. So if you go and he's a teacher, he talks, he explains stuff why. There's a process to what he's doing in there. And I think the other factor is trainers are mic'd up. Trainers are now part of the show. And you know what? The fighter, to me, the way I was taught boxing is the fighter is the business. He is the business. Without the fighter, there's nobody else. Nobody else coexists, okay? But you have to build your team around that fighter. And old school trainers, they trained the fighter. They took the loss. They took the win. You know, most of the time trainers get blamed for the loss, unfortunately. You know, it's the trainer's fault, you know, and
the fighter thinks so too when they fire the trainer.
right, and they jump ship. You see
Right.
them with one trainer, this, that, the other thing, and everything else. So, yeah, I don't see our sport getting advanced because you don't hear a kid say, "Oh, I want to work in boxing." Right? I want to. How do I get involved in boxing? How do I get involved to be a promoter? How do I get involved to be a coach? You know, if you're a football coach, I keep using the analogy, or a baseball coach, you got to coach in the minor leagues before you go to the major leagues.
100%. And before that, you got to be high school and college.
Yeah, you got to do something. You got to have some prerequisite out there. Except now in sports, we're going to analytics, and you don't have to be that. But I get that a little bit. But you know, boxing right now, it's back to our point. It is tough. You go into the gym and you see some of these kids. They're working hard. Some are disillusioned. Some have talent. It's just, you know, they don't understand how to connect the dots, how to get from point A to point B to point C to point D in the sport. And it's, like you said outside, it's the Mayweather effect. Everybody sees Floyd, and hats off to him because he made himself his own promotional company. Now everybody thinks that that's the way to go.
They all have it. But it's not. It wasn't just a fighter. It's the promoter and the manager and the network, whether it's a streaming service or a they all put the value in the O. So now the goal is to save the O. I can't sell a fighter unless he's undefeated. That's the mentality. Losses never mattered. Back in the day, they used to have, you build up a fighter, you build him up locally first. You know, becomes a local hero. Then the next thing is you're going to the next town or the next state over, and you're fighting their local guy. And now you're selling tickets, and it becomes this, you know, this competition, you know, this rivalry. And that mushrooms out to national and ultimately international if you become, you know, that good. We don't have that today. We get fast tracks. You know, I dissect boxing records all the time. And it's kind of funny to look at the records. And even when fighters are fighting other fighters that appear to have a good record, I never heard of them. And I know more about fighters than most, and I never heard of these guys. You know, they come out of nowhere with these records, you know, and it's a shame because fighters, you use the analogy with other sports. Well, I've always said, if the best football team played the worst football team every week and won and went undefeated, are they really the best? You know, the only way to get better in anything is to challenge yourself.
Listen, I totally agree. My theory is this, you know, it'll never happen. You're in the top 10 fighter, the names go in the hat. You're the champ, Billy? Okay, you get the bye. The other guys are going to fight off. You keep winning, you go. You get to the top.
Yeah, but why not do it the way it used to be? You get, first of all, with 8 divisions and only 10 top 10 contenders in 8 divisions, is you make it to number 10, you're a damn good fighter.
Agreed.
Okay?
Agreed.
Today you could have 40 different number 10s for any division, right?
Yes, correct.
You know, so the truth of the matter is what happened to climbing the ladder? So you scratch, you get up to number 10, you fight the guy ahead of you. And if you beat him, you go to the next guy.
Yeah.
You know, you look at the ratings. I did an evaluation of ratings not too long ago, and you see the sanctioning bodies. They got number 1, so-and-so. They got a champ. In most cases, they have 2 or 3 champs as champs. Then you have the number 1 contender. Then number 2, not rated. Then the number 3 and the number 4. Wait a minute. Isn't number 3 number 2 now? I mean, it makes sense, right? Well, you know why. They saved that spot for somebody to pay for that slot. So we're not even getting true rankings anymore.
No.
You know, the
No,
sad
and
thing
then
is,
and it then depends on who the promotional company is. This promotional team, we don't want to fight them. We don't. No,
well,
no, no.
that's called the Dana White effect.
Yeah.
They all want their own little world, and it doesn't work. PBC showed us that. Everybody thought they were going to save boxing. They had on every network. Now, it's all pay-per-view. Yeah, I mean, it's, in my opinion, theoretically, we could have the best fighters, boxers, that the world has ever seen today. With the advances in nutrition and training techniques, we could conceivably have the best talented fighters. Plus, of all the things they learned from the fighters of yesteryear, the thing that's missing is the heart. And the toughness. We just don't have that anymore. You talk about, like I always like to talk about Jack Dempsey. People say Jack Dempsey. Well, Jack Dempsey, his family was so poor that, he quit school in 8th grade because he was being made fun of because he had to wear his sister's clothes to school, not by choice, by the way. And,
Right.
he got picked on. And he became, what does he do as a 8-10-year-old kid? He's working in the mines with these guys and fighting. That's toughness. That's poverty. Today, I'm not knocking poverty because obviously poverty is an issue. But today's poverty-stricken individual still has a cell phone, still has $200 sneakers. The level
there's different thing. And I think today, we won't even use the word poverty. Let's use the word adversity in boxing, because good fighters, Dempsey overcame his adversity. Ali had adversity at times.
Every champion will tell you the same story. They used boxing to better their life.
Yeah, so it's like whether it was to put food on the table, they were getting picked on, or whatever reason it was. But these young fighters, first of all, don't deal with adversity. It's a comfort world. It's like, I tell fighters, like, are you running at 5:30 in the morning? No, I usually run then why? Well, I got to go to work. I got to go to school. Okay, you go to school at 5:30? No. You run before school? No. What time you got to be at work? 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock? Why aren't you running? Why aren't you, how bad do you want to be a champion? How bad? And people knock Floyd.
Floyd always was in good shape.
Floyd run at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And for a guy later in his career, didn't have to get out of bed to fight. He trained like a champion. Love him, like him, or hate him. But you know what? He trained like a champion.
And he always stayed in good shape. He's still in shape.
He's in good shape. But getting back to yourself, you're managing fighters. You're doing, the managing end had to be challenging.
It is. Trying to get the best deals for your fighters and trying to pick, again, now I'm going to, go against what I say, but trying to pick the right fights. But my most successful fighter, I was blessed to be working with her, was Chevelle Halbach. She's still fighting. Yeah. Which she shouldn't.
Tell us a little bit about Chevelle for people who don't know her in the women's end of boxing, because I know the name, I know a little bit about her, not too much, but I know she was a pioneer in the sport.
Well, she was a phenomenal fighter. Yeah. And I told her one time, I said, "There's going to come a day when you're going to get mad at me," because I've always was honest with all my fighters, and I said, "There's going to come a day when you're not going to listen to me." And that day did come, when I said, "You've accomplished everything." Chevelle did not have an easy road. And for female boxing, we had to travel a lot. We went, we got to tour the world really with Chevelle. Some fights, she was robbed because we were in somebody else's backyard, and other fights, she did very well. She won multiple world titles in different weight classes, and she's still, her goal today at 50 years old is to continue. She wants to win one more, but in Chevelle's defense, she's looking for a payday, and I even talked to her recently She's not going to get the payday she's looking for. And quite honestly, the female fighters of her era that I was involved with, didn't make the money. I mean, you're getting a world title fight. And if you could, get 10 grand for them, you were doing great, Today I speak with a lot of female fighters, and the big argument now is they want to go 3-minute rounds. They feel they can make more money. And I personally don't see why they don't go 3-minute rounds, just because the WBC says that they can't.
Honestly, my opinion on that, just to weigh in, the talent pool in the women's end of boxing is there. Another minute is not going to make a difference, because most of these women are sparring 3 minutes. Most of them are sparring three minutes.
I've never met one that didn't.
And I don't think the extra minute is going to make a difference at their level.
When Chevelle was fighting, the one thing I will say is that when you watched female boxing, you saw fighters that were fighting. And I know that's a stupid thing to say, but they did not have an easy way, and they were always exciting. I very rarely saw a non-exciting female fight. The success of female boxing has turned female boxing into something similar to what we've been witnessing with male boxing. The females don't always pick the toughest fights anymore. Some of them do, and they're at the top of the game.
Well, let me ask you this, Billy. Do you think in the woman's aspect, and I'm not looking to piss people off, you're fast-tracked with less fights as a woman because the pool is not as deep?
100%.
So, we see women at 10 fights getting a title shot because, weight classes, the talent in that weight class. And I know a fighter, right? And she fought Amanda Serrano. I'm not going to say the girl was fast-tracked. Her fights were all built. She had belts, and Amanda destroyed her in the first 45 seconds of the fight.
Amanda's a rare breed. She's a very talented fighter, like Katie Taylor. I mean, those are two very talented fighters. Too bad there wasn't more like them so that they had each other to fight. I mean, how many more Amanda Serrano, Katie Taylor fights can you watch,
Yeah.
But yes, I agree with you 100%. The pool of fighters is not the way it was. I mean, if you go back and look at it, the arc of boxing, the rise and fall of the sweet science, a book. Mike Silver wrote it, and if you look at what Mike did in that book, he took the 40s, the era of the 40s, and he compared it with the era in the early 2000s. And the numbers that he was using, and his argument was that boxing was better. And New York State alone in 1940, whatever he focused on, he took 2 years, had more fighters registered as professional fighters in New York State alone than all of the world had when he compared it in the early 2000s.
So if you
think about that,
you go back to that time, right? Madison Square Garden was running fights 2 times a week.
Right.
Tuesday night fights, Friday night fights. Every week. That was just the Garden.
That was just the Mecca.
That was just the old Garden, right?
Yeah.
Not counting Sunnyside Gardens, Brooklyn, all these other different venues, and you had fighters. And we're going to have, after you'll get to meet him, Neil Pallone, who was Tough Tony Pallone's nephew. Now, Tony Pallone fought out of Greenwich Village. He was done boxing by the time he was 21 years old. He had over 50 or 60 professional fights.
Look at Harry Greb.
Harry Greb, right? These guys fought for paychecks.
That was what we said before. It was
like,
trade.
Okay, what am I doing? I can go out. I'm going to get paid. Okay, here. And you know what? Look at some of the records, right? I said to you about Joey Archer fought Emil Griffin less than a year later after he fought him for the title already. 2 years. You're never going to see guys do that again.
No. Well, fighters, and again, I don't want to pick on Floyd, but he's a good example. He's only fought, out of his 50 wins, he's only fought 2 fighters twice. You know, Jose Luis Castillo.
And Pacquiao.
No, Marcus Maidana.
Oh yeah, that's right.
He didn't
that's
fight
right.
Pacquiao twice.
No, that's right. That's right. You're correct about that.
But in both of those fights, people thought he lost the first one. People thought he lost the Jose Luis Castillo first fight, and he beat him soundly in the second. Same thing with the Maidana fight. The first one, a lot of people thought, you know, that he might. But you look at Sugar Ray Robinson. I forget the number. I think he fought 16 different fighters multiple times. And Jake LaMotta, he fought 6 times. And you know, you look at that, and some people might be watching and saying, well, big deal, right? Well, the big deal is, and you know, as a trainer, you fight somebody once, and when you go back, and today we have the luxury of reviewing the tape, oh, I could have done this. He's open for that, right? Well, by fighting him a second and a third time, you get to apply those things.
Right.
So now all of a sudden you fight a guy multiple times, and the outcome, like in Sugar Ray Robinson, Jake LaMotta's case, they fight 6 times. LaMotta won only 1.
Yeah.
That's a big credit for both of them for fighting each other and
but also
trying to
you're
mix it up.
talking about different individuals, okay? You're talking about pre-tape, right? So you're fighting so-and-so. That fight's close. Unless you get starched, dropped, beat, totally beat post to post, you come out of that fight, man, I could beat this guy.
100%.
And you know what?
You go in the fight saying
that.
that.
The other factor is, you know what? You're fighting the best. So if I'm a fighter and I'm going to get a choice just to say fight Sugar Ray Robinson, and they're going to say, hey, Dave, you're going to fight Robinson again? Absolutely. You want to fight him again? Absolutely. Because as a fighter, I want to beat him. I want to beat the best.
Well, you just hit on what I think is lacking today. That desire to prove you're the best inside the ring, like Terrence Crawford did. Everyone said he was nuts to go up those weight classes and fight Canelo. But today, I think the main agenda, maybe you see it more because you're right in the trenches, is that the fighters today, their main goal is the money. They think they're going to become rich. They think they're going to become Floyd. You know, I mean, do they want to fight the best? Remember, at the end of the day, the fighter gets to decide who he fights.
But to make the money, you got to fight the best. To make the real money in boxing, right? If you're sitting here today and you're managing fighters, right? Whoever it is, and you're in the gym and you're 20 fights deep in your career and the call comes, right? The opportunity to fight a Crawford, a Canelo, a Mayweather. They're in your, whoever's in your class. You know, to me, yeah, I'm taking it.
Of course.
But fighters look at it like this. First question out of their mouth, how much? How much?
Yeah.
Bro, you know what? I get it. You know what? I had a fighter fight somebody once, and we'll talk off screen because you know both fighters. I'm like, dude, this is the fight for you. No one expects you to win this fight. They don't. All you got to do is go in there and either win or look good losing because your value is just going to go up.
But that's where the fighters are so hesitant because they've been brainwashed to feel that if they lose a fight, their value goes down. And sometimes you get fighters that lose, and then next thing you know, promoters are calling them because they figure, hey, he's a tough kid, but he'll come on the losing end. And you get become stereotyped. You know, who's the kid? I'm going blank. He fought everybody. A lot of tats.
Rosado.
Right.
Gabe
okay.
Rosado.
I just saw a post about Gabe Rosado saying, "Oh, he's a bum." That guy is far from a bum, and I don't care that he's got double-digit losses.
He had a run. If you saw in there, he was brought in as a tough opponent because he was a tough kid and he didn't turn fights down.
Never turned them down.
And he was a Philly fighter, so you know right there, the worst Philly fighter, you got to fight him.
No,
you got to fight him. I don't care what his record is. Rosado, He shocks some people. How about Chris Arreola?
Chris Arreola.
You know what I mean? Like as a heavy, like there are names out there that these guys got fed and they turn around.
Chris Arreola was his own enemy.
Oh yeah,
because the weight and stuff. And I actually got to talk with him out in Vegas once, and he had a fan following and everything, and then he just went away. I mean, it's a shame with Chris Arreola.
But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of fighters like that. But you know what? You got to look at yourself in the mirror at one point in your career and say, boxing's a risk. It is. It's a risk. If you are who you are and you got heart, I'm fighting anybody. You know what? Yeah, I've been training. Let's roll the dice. Let's do it. You know what I mean? Because Buster Douglas, lightning in a bottle one night.
And I remember that,
you know what I mean? So like and there's more stories like that. We can go over
hours. We can
talk about that. But you know what? If you don't take the chance, how do you ever know?
Listen, Victor Ortiz made a statement once, and I criticized the statement because it was a ridiculous thing to say. But looking back, I think it's the mentality of a lot of fighters today. He was beaten up in a fight pretty bad. And I forget who he was fighting. And at the end of the fight, they have the mic in his face, and he says, "No one should have to take a beating like I just took." And I remember saying to myself, yeah, no one, if they are a lawyer or if they're a carpenter, but when you sign up to be a fighter, you got to assume you're going to get smacked around at least once, and I could never understand that statement from a professional fighter.
Okay. Let's take him, for example, and let's go to the Mayweather fight with him.
Yeah, you don't want to ask me my thought of that.
Okay. Listen, he had Mayweather shook, in my opinion. He had Mayweather shook. He had a mental lapse. And that's the statement that guy just made right there, which I never heard that statement before till you just told me.
Yeah, it was on HBO or something like that, yeah.
That's the kind of mentality that he had, that not strong mental belief in himself, I believe, because he backed off and Mayweather did what Mayweather did.
That was a tough thing. Yes, protect yourself at all times. That is, you hear that a million times. But the way that punch was delivered, I thought it was a sucker punch. I said it. I'll say it again. I said it then. I still say it. It didn't go down as one. It is what it is, But you could always throw in my face, protect yourself at all times, which is true, But he was offering to shake his hands, but whatever. But yeah, that. And the other thing that gets me with boxing today, and it's caused me to turn the volume up. First of all, I don't like commentators that are yelling and screaming at me. I can't stand that. And the other thing is I don't like that they're talking every single second and they're telling you everything that you should be seeing with your own eyes. And even if you're seeing something with your own eyes, they might be telling you something different, almost to the sense where you're not supposed to believe what you're watching.
You know something?
But it's the punch stats. They talk about, and I think that's what which got Jim Lampley off the air, because Jim Lampley was one of the best.
I loved him. You're
until
right.
He started calling the fights based on the punch stats. And we all know that the punch stats are subjective. You have two human beings, in some cases only one, but when they have two, one's got the red corner, one's got the blue corner, and they're hitting a computer, a laptop, that's telling you if it's a punch, if it's a jab. That's how it works. And it's subjective. Me and you could, and another guy could watch the same punch. You could say it landed flush. I could say it grazed him. This guy could say, what punch? the best thing that I ever witnessed, and I was shocked that they never did it again, was ESPN in a fight put cameras on the judges' heads. And they showed a punch, several punches, from the position that the judges were sitting. And you could see clearly that the judges saw the difference in the punch. And that's an explanation of why sometimes the scorecards aren't the same. And people start saying it's a robbery, it's a scam. But you know as well as I, fighters sometimes feel comfortable in certain parts, locations of the ring. They might have a fight, in the red corners area for the whole 12 rounds because that's where they like to fight. So that judge, maybe 2 of the 3 judges have a clear view. The third one doesn't.
Doesn't have a view. I have a couple of different opinions. So back to the punch count, right? And if you watch a fight that they do with the punch count, who has the bigger percentage? Majority of the time, that fighter's winning the fight. If you look at who's got a higher volume of punches, body connects, that fighter's, if it's going to a decision, that fighter will win the fight.
Sometimes you have strong rounds.
Yeah.
So if you're going over, like a total punches, you could have a fighter the first 3 rounds, being like the Energizer Bunny.
Yeah.
And then the last part of the fight, he's getting rocked. Or they're scoring punches that aren't affecting.
That aren't connecting. You get a good defensive fighter and you're punching, you're hitting them on the gloves, you're hitting them on the forearms. They're counting punches.
Which they shouldn't.
Okay, but that's not really a connect.
No. And what about body punches? How come they don't count those?
Yeah, well. So my thing is, we use a program for our fighters. They're actually trackers. They go in your wraps on your hands.
That's the only way.
Connected to my phone.
That's the only way.
So we use it to see how many punches, because every time you hit the bag, it counts as a punch. It'll break your left hand down. It'll break down the power and the volume.
Why don't they use that in fights? Because I've said that. See, I didn't even know they had it out yet.
Yeah.
So you just educated me. And the thing is I've said that exact thing. I said the only way that you can use them as stats, look, baseball, football, those are statistics. You get the ball 10 times, you make 100 yards, you're averaging 10 yards a carry. That's math. It's basic, right? Boxing, subjective until you remove the human element. If that device can be in the glove and they have something, a receiver, whether it be lotion or something, because they could do that, now the stats are accurate. And I would be 100% supportive. But right now, I think they're subjective, and unless they do it after the fight and watch it on film and score each one, which who's got the time to do that?
Yeah.
There's
a lot of things, and well as I do, because you work fights, you've been around the fights, you're ringside. That fight moves quick. If you're looking up, I've worked corners in fights, and I had to go back and look at the fight and say, holy shit, I missed some of that. I didn't see that. Well, like you said, they were in the other corner, and you can't see what's going on at times.
Coach, you know how many times I've called fights? I'm sitting on the apron, and I'm watching the fight on the screen because I can see the whole fight from the camera shot, even though the action is 2 feet away from me. And it's such a bad habit because you find yourself looking down at that TV screen when the action's happening right in front of you.
Yeah, so I worked an MMA fight Friday night in Manhattan, and I wasn't the head trainer. I actually, when they were in the cage on the other side, looked at the screen behind me to kind of just see where we were at with the other coaches, you know what I mean, to let them know. But my thing is, I always thought, and I said this to Don Trella, and it might be a little crazy of an idea. If you watch tennis, where's the judge?
He's sitting in the center, on top, above, raised.
Right? I mean, for boxing, would it make sense to elevate the judge so he can see the fight as opposed to looking up?
Didn't they experiment? I'm almost positive they did an experiment where they had a judge watching on camera in another room. Wasn't even ringside. Yeah, it was at. I'm almost gonna say it was at one of the at one of the Connecticut casinos as a test. because I agree with you. I think that, especially, look, as a fan, we have the luxury of the replay and,
Right.
all that stuff. And these guys don't. And a lot of the judges are dead nuts on. Most of the referees today are pretty good. I like referees that you don't remember who the referee was. That's an indication to me that it's a good referee, because it's not fighter A versus fighter B featuring referee so-and-so. I don't want to see the referee in my camera shot.
Yeah.
I don't want to see him trying to get, on the
Slowing
film.
the action down. And
just so you can get him.
Yeah.
I mean, I can mention names that I think are way overrated referees that people have said that how great they are. And it's not true. I will mention one name that I think he's one of the best is Harvey Dock.
Harvey Dock is, first of all, and I'll tell you what a gentleman he is, right? So we were at a card, and he was actually sitting in front of me. And the fight comes back, the decision comes back, close decision, right? It was, and I said, Harvey, what do you think? And he gives a neutral answer.
Damn.
He gives me a neutral answer. I'm like, all right. But
Charlie Finch is,
yeah.
I met Charlie. I was doing an event, and it was one of his first fights he did in some place in New York, way up in the boonies. And he was a lot more vocal. And I remember him getting yelled at because after a fight, we were all kind of hanging out, and they told him he can't do that anymore. And he has evolved into a really good referee too, Charlie Fitch. Those two guys, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of good ones, but those two stick out in my head only because they're not trying to get in that camera shot.
I agree.
I
agree. So back to you a little bit. Tell me about the evolution of the radio show and what was the process. I know you said a family member told you about podcasting, but, this is something that you've had, I guess, in your mind for a while to be informative to the fan and bring it mainstream. Well, and you've been doing it 22 years, correct?
Yeah. We had taken 6 months off. I had a co-host, Sal Rocky Senecola, who was a fighter, and he and I, became very close. And he passed away. He lost his battle with cancer. So it took me a while,
Right.
and I was lucky. I got inducted into the New York State Boxing Hall of Fame, and then the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame, and I just thought that was it. I wasn't gonna, I didn't need to do
Great
anymore.
honors. Congratulations.
I'm a New Yorker through and through, and I so appreciate that. But the Florida one really was an honor for me. Not that New York wasn't, but they just do it right. From all the halls of fame that I've been involved with, second to Canastota is Florida. So it was a big one. But anyway, with the show, the premise was, believe it or not, the premise was exactly what you and I are doing right now. I came up with the idea of what I used to perceive as two guys BSing at a bar over a beer or something, and boxing comes into the conversation. And as well as you start talking about boxing, especially boxing people, and it's like, oh, you remember so-and-so? Oh, I'll leave. Oh, remember the fight with From? Oh, hey, what about the fight with this?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, 3 hours go by, and you guys are talking about it. And that's what the premise of the show was. And that's what we did. And in the beginning, all we wanted to do was get on radio. We were lucky. We got on I told you many stations, and then we got on TV, so the show was doing really well. I mean, that was how I was making a living, sponsorships. But then as the podcast world grew and caught up to us, so to speak,
more people.
And then now what you have is a lot of people doing it, their own little followings.
Right, their niche.
And, I just think that I'm aged out. I think that, I don't relate to the young kids. I feel something that I've mentioned on my, speeches is my big wish is that the young fans of today would learn a little more about the history. And boxing is unlike any other. It's good to know the history of every sport, but boxing, I feel, is more important because without those guys that literally gave their lives, and we wouldn't have the sport today.
For little money.
For nothing.
For little money.
I
agree with you. And one thing is, like, you did this before the information highway. So where was your information coming from? Because today it's easy, right? We go on the internet. I can do blah, 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 blah. We could talk about the fight Saturday night. All the information is there within an hour.
Within an hour, yeah.
Right? So we have you had to do research. And you had to go into your encyclopedia of knowledge and relationships of the sport, right? Of the sport.
Yep.
Like a sportscaster, a sports writer, an announcer had to do their homework. Had to build the relationship. Where am I getting the information about this fighter who's fighting? You know what I mean? Like, let's talk about Wardley and Parker. Without the internet, you had to find information. How did you find it? You went to the trainer. You went to the gym. You showed up where they were training to try to get some inside scoop of what was going on.
See them for yourself.
Yeah.
See what their tendencies were. When in the beginning and probably the first 15 years, I traveled all over for the show for that reason, But I also prided myself on the historical aspect. I read a lot of books.
I agree. And I'll tell you a funny story. So you're talking about the history of boxing and people don't know. Fighters don't know. So I like to mess around in the gym a lot with our fighters, and I like to, trivia questions, right? Music, fighters, and I'm like, I'll give you $100 if you could tell me about this fighter. I don't even know. So about 2 weeks ago, we're in a car. We're driving to sparring, right? So I have Tony Gennaro's great-grandson, who I'm training right now. Him, his dad, 2 other fighters, right? So I get a call from Jerry Cooney because I had called him and I was talking to him.
Was he wearing socks?
I don't know what he was doing.
He never wears socks. Every time I seen him.
I tell him. So he was supposed to be a guest at a boxing event in Connecticut. And I called him. Jerry, he calls me back. He goes, no, I'm not coming to the event, blah, 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 whatever happened. He had a family thing with his son. Okay. He said, do me a favor. Can you, I got 3 kids in the car. We're going to spar. Can you, put me on speaker. Put him on speaker, hold the phone, right? He goes in, right, tells him a couple of things. Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you later. So I go to the kid in the back. I'll go, this one kid, and he's a talented amateur. I said, do you know who you were just on the phone with? And he goes, no. I go, what? I said, you got your phone? I said, Google your phone. Google his name right now. And then he's reading, it gets quiet, right? And he goes, oh my God. I go, yeah. I said, learn a little bit about the sport that you're doing.
Yep.
Learn about some of the guys because you know what? We grew up knowing, people knew who Mickey Mantle was, even if you didn't play baseball. You knew every kid in New York wanted to be Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, or Duke Schneider.
Or Joe Namath when I was a kid.
Joe Namath, right?
Football.
Joe Namath,
yeah.
right? Joe Namath, right? And Derek J. You know the history, but people don't know boxing. No. They don't know, okay. I have kids that don't know who Sugar Ray Leonard was or Thomas Hearns. Like,
it's scary. Listen, I'm going to tell you a funny story. I wrote a book about Tom Molyneux, who was a freed slave. He fought for his freedom, and blah blah blah. And it's a short book. It took me 7 years to talk about research. 7 years to end up with a 150-page book. But anyway, before the book was released, I was promoting it on my show. And now, granted, Tom Molyneux fought for the first world title against Tom Cribb in 1810. Remember that for a second.
Yeah, I'm going to remember that.
All right. December of 1810. But anyway, I get this email, and this kid, obviously was a kid, and he said in the email, and the book hadn't been released yet. I was, talking about it. And I get this email, and it says, hey, I've been watching your show, and I really like to learn more about Tom Molyneux. Can you send me some YouTube clips of him? I kid you not. And I remember reading it, I'm going, YouTube, they didn't even have cameras, right? I mean, all this pictures of him in my book are sketches, you know. I included it in the book that he wrote that, you know, that I actually had somebody asking me. But that tells you the mindset of the kids today. And the argument always comes up about Sugar Ray Robinson. Well, you know, the videos I saw of him, well, you can't always go by video. Jack Johnson, you know, I always said Jack Johnson. To me, Jack Johnson was the Floyd Mayweather in the early 1900s. From all the accounts, you know, he toyed with his opponents. He was defensively so much better, blah, blah, blah. But the footage you see was one camera that the guy was cranking.
Look, you go back to some of the Dempsey fights, some of those great fights, even some of the early Joe Louis fights. The video does not.
You have to wait till the 80s for the video.
We couldn't, like for us to, the technology we have today, the television, you can't watch a fight in black and white. First of all, the cameramen were 400 feet away.
Well, Jack Johnson, they were 60 yards away, and you know, in the sun.
Yeah.
And they used to have the whitest canvas, which, you know, with those cameras, and the lighting was terrible. You know, and we talked briefly about Harry Greb. There's no footage of Harry Greb, so they dismiss him. You know, Sugar Ray Robinson, no footage of him as a welterweight, where he was known as the best welterweight. No footage. So that means he wasn't good? You know, you have to do that thing. What do they call it? Oh, yeah, read a book. You know, pick up a book.
Go to the library, do research.
You know, which is at their fingertips. They could get all the same stuff on the internet now, you know.
Yeah, you can pull the old Ring magazine articles about him.
Okay.
You can get in some of them. There's pictures actually that were actual fight pictures.
No, I know, but you mentioned Ring magazine. Ring magazine was our only way to see who the top 10 was. You know, to see who the upcoming fight, even though it still was, the stuff happened a month and a half before, 2 months. You know, personally, I stopped getting the Ring when, you know, the internet was hot, and you're getting September's issue in April, and, you know, the fights are all old.
They stopped doing production. Someone had found a bunch of old Ring magazines and gave them to me. So I have a plethora of, you know, boxing information that I don't go through it a lot. I'll pick it up and read it every now and then, but
it's great.
My dad worked for the newspaper, so I'm a reader. Always was as a kid, the papers, books, you know, we come out of that generation. We had to write reports. You had to actually go to the library and pull the information.
And if you made a mistake, you had to rewrite the whole page.
Yeah, right. And don't ask how the teachers knew that you were, you know, plagiarizing, right? You know, now today you got ChatGPT.
Yeah, but now you're allowed to plagiarize.
Yeah, ChatGPT, you're a genius.
Yeah.
You know, I'm an author now. I can put 2 words together, right?
Yeah, no,
but, you know, going on right now in your show and what you do, what do you look to now? Because there is so many different people out there, okay? And you know, are somebody who's been around the sport at many different levels that bring a lot of value. You're not just a guy gathering information. You've been ringside. You've managed fighters. You've promoted shows, okay? Your experience around the sport, the little things that people don't realize, you know, what it takes for fighters to get moved, what it takes for you to get a title shot, you know, on both ends of the gambit. What information do you look to use right now, Billy, as far as when you do your show? You're going to do your show tomorrow, okay? You're going to talk about a little bit about the Wardley Parker fight you stated, but how do you gather what is important for you to come across each week now?
Well, I write my show. Not everything, but I basically break my show down. I always have. So for me to do my 2-hour show, it'll probably take me between 6 and 8 hours to put it all together. I'll try and touch on, I mean, it's hard today when there's nothing going on, It's a miracle when we used to do our morning show. I mean, I did every day, 2 hours a day, and it was kind of a little bit of comedy too. And it was the whole idea was the drive to work, when people used to listen to radio.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I'll have a guest that we'll talk to. So I'll work on that. I'll touch on what took place. I am started my own ratings because I'm so sick of seeing what we talked about earlier. So I'll do that. I'll project next week, do predictions and stuff. But I see. Honestly, I don't think people give a crap about what I've done, to be honest with you. Like you mentioned, you've been a promoter, you've been a manager, all these things. I don't think fans today give to.
Yeah, but that's value to the sport. I think, I get what you're saying, but like if somebody's going to talk about the sport, right? Like we're talking right here, I'm not an authority on the sport. I'm a fan of the sport. I gain my information. I'm lucky to be in the trenches. I'm lucky to be able to go around to gyms and talk to people and meet people. And I think that's important to convey what the sport is, because it's not what we see on Saturday afternoon, two warriors beating the crap out of each other. There's a lot that goes into that to get to that point.
Months.
You know what I mean? Months, years, and a lot of different people involved in that aspect of it. And you know what? I think, look, niche is great, right? Views are great. People come up with everything else, but we keep talking about it. The history of this sport is going. It's slowly slipping away.
So, two things. One, one of the main reasons I had taken the time off, and I didn't think I was going to come back. But one of the main reasons I did decide to do the show again wasn't for the numbers or anything, because quite honestly, our numbers are nowhere the way they used to be. But I did it for those diehard fans. I have a lot of diehard fans that reach out to me. And quite honestly, there's several that I talk to on a regular basis. I've given them my personal number. And those guys, I mean, they needed the show. They look forward to the show. Some of these guys are getting on in years, and I just felt for them. The other part is, Bert Sugar was I knew him personally, and he was a guy, a character in this sport that I used to love to listen to and watch and talk to when I got to talk to him in person. And I've been told that I'm similar to him in today's standard. I would never compare myself to the late, great Bert Sugar. But I think the problem is there's no interest in a Bert Sugar anymore. And
Howard
that's my Howard Cosell was, listen, he was different than Bert Sugar.
Yeah, but those type of personalities.
Yeah. Well, now you get Morallo yelling and screaming at you. I can't even watch it.
Well, that's because he's not taking his meds.
Don't even get me started with him. Don't even get me started with him. But
actually, you know what? And just to throw this off, and they took him off. Paulie Malignaggi, I thought, was one of the best announcers out there, because Paulie called the fight from a fighter standpoint and gave you why guys were doing things.
There's always as long as they're not a corporate guy, like Timothy Bradley he knows his stuff, but he became a corporate guy. Andre Ward, same thing. When you had Roy Jones was good, except Roy Jones would talk about Roy Jones. And I'd always say, aren't you Roy Jones? You're talking about Roy Jones in the third person. Yeah. But who I thought was one of the best? And when I call fights, I try to follow what he said to do. And that was Nick Charles. Nick Charles used to say, I call the action as it's happening in front of me, and let the fan decipher what's going on. And that stuck with me, because that's correct. You don't need to have somebody call a fight and tell you what's going on because you're too stupid to not understand what you're watching. If you're not understanding what you're watching you don't know the sport.
Well, you can call it like the old radio announcers.
The radio announcers were the best.
Because you had to envision, they had to paint that picture of what was really going on.
Well,
in
you know the story. You've mentioned Madison Square Garden, the old garden, and I remember being told a story where these two guys were watching a fight, and it was the most boring fight they ever watched. And finally, there was a bar right across the street from the old garden. They're like, let's get out of here. We'll go have a beer. So they get out and they leave the fight. And they walk across the street and they're having a beer and the fight's on the radio. And the announcer made the same fight that they left sound so exciting. They guzzled their beer, ran across the street, only to find the same boring fight, But you're right. I mean, when you don't have something to watch, you got to paint that picture, One last thing I just want to mention is if you would have come up to me in 1986, let's say, and said to me, hey, Bill, do you think that you're witnessing the last great era of boxing? I would have laughed. I would have said, you think this is a great era of boxing? And I would have started throwing, the 60s at you and the 70s and the 40s and all of the other great eras. But you fast forward to 2025, and I believe that the 80s was the last great era of boxing. We could talk about some great fighters that fought in the 90s and the early 2000s and stuff, but not like the 80s. The 80s, they still were fighting each other. They still had to fight each other. They couldn't duck. And the Fab Four is a great example.
We also had, in the 80s, you had boxing on CBS and NBC and ABC. So you had mainstream TV that were covering fights at the time. And I don't know if you remember this. If you remember on Saturday afternoons on CBS, they had fights. So you got to see Alexis Arguello. You got to see Ray Mancini.
I love Boom Boom.
Aaron Pryor, Livingstone Bramble. You remember some of those fights on that thing. I said to somebody, you fight like Alexis Arguello. I had a kid in the gym, and he goes, who? I said, are you kidding me, man? Are you kidding me? Like, you know what I'm saying?
No.
But there were, a lot of fighters at that time. I don't know. I think there's talent out there. There's a lot of talent out there in the world now with fighters. Europe is coming to play more so than ever in the 80s. We've seen more of a European swing. They fight more over there. I think, and they take it a little more seriously than we do here. It is more of, a country. And, you go to Usyk. Usyk is not only a talented fighter, but he's fighting for his country. And we've seen fights like that in history. We've seen politically fights get matched over times.
Louis
Schmeling, right? Which a lot of people, you have two countries, in the United States and Germany at time, and that's as big as it gets, right?
Yeah.
So, when people ask me, and not taking away from Usyk, he's just not my style type of fighter. He is a tough style to me, okay? I give him a lot of ups because he can fight. He trains hard. He's went up against everybody that they're putting in front of him, and, but I said to somebody, because they said, well, what do you think? I said, one thing about Usyk, he's fighting for a country. When you got a guy who's got more, not only his own personal, but a country that he's carrying on his back, you got to watch that man.
Manny Pacquiao.
Yeah, you got to watch that man.
100%. And Usyk, I'm with you with him. I give him credit for the ring IQ, but it's tough. Like to be honest with you, I'm surprised Daniel Dubois didn't beat him. And I say that I know that people are probably saying,
forget about Daniel Dubois, because I'm surprised that Tyson Fury didn't put him away in the last fight, because if you watch that fight, Fury buckled Usyk once. He kept backing off. He did not stay pressurized, in my opinion. And I know somebody who was in Fury's camp for that fight. And it was like, I'm like, what's going on here? Dubois, to me, is an enigma.
Well, Dubois, okay. I'll touch on Fury first. Tyson Fury was also rocked by Usyk, so he was fighting a little cautious. If you recall, an uppercut by Steve USS Cunningham when he was still, he just came up to heavyweight, buckled Tyson Fury back in the day. So, Tyson Fury, look, I had a UK correspondent on my show, and I got turned on to Tyson Fury after his third pro fight. So I've seen every fight since then. And I've seen the change with Fury and everything else. It doesn't surprise me that he lost. Now, I think if he fights Anthony Joshua, I think Joshua will beat him. And I say that because they're similar in size, and Joshua is a guy that if he utilizes his jab and can unleash his power, he's going to hurt you. But we all know he's got a weak chin, and I believe so does Tyson Fury. As far as Daniel Dubois goes, he was rushed a little. He was moved up a little too quick. But when he fought Anthony Joshua, that style he fought, the Mike Tyson-esque type style, I think, and I expected him to fight the same way against Usyk, but he didn't. And he fought Usyk's fight, and he was ultimately knocked out. Now, I don't know what's left in Dubois. He's been knocked out several times.
He was on that.
One of the heavyweights there.
Yeah, he was so let me go to Fury. Fury went to war with Wilder, got off the canvas. We have not seen that Fury since. We have not seen that. Then, yeah, does he have a weak chin? But you know what? I know Usyk is a little shorter than you. You should have been staying on your jab and keeping Usyk off you all night long. You let him in your house.
Yeah.
Okay? Because you had to jab him, throw that right hand, and move. And one thing Tyson Fury does well for a big man is move. He can move.
And if
he's your abnormal big man.
Well, if you watch some of his early fights, he wasn't in there with guys the same size. And when he was using his jab, he was punching downward.
Yep.
And the same thing with the Klitschko brothers. And early in their career, they were fighting guys, 6'2", right?
Yeah.
Which were way smaller. As they started fighting guys the same height, they had to learn to throw a jab the way you would teach a fighter to throw a jab.
Also, and the factor is, look, and I was in camp with Vladimir, with Manny Stewart for a week. With a fighter.
Trainer.
Listen. But when you're working with those big fighters, the trainer's not the same size.
What do you mean?
You have Fury, who's what, 6'9", 6'6",
allegedly 6'9", yeah.
Okay. Sugar Hill is not 6'9", who's training Fury.
Oh, when he's like hitting the mitts or something?
Yeah, so they got your style has to work with the big guys like that, where like you're right about punching down, so you have to change that habit. But now also in the heavyweights, look, the evolution of the Klitschko brothers evolved into Europe. Now all big heavyweights. Well, we don't see, Dubois is pretty much, and he's not a small heavyweight, but he comes out of the era of the Tyson, the Holyfield height, Layman
6'2",
Brewster.
6'3",
you know what I mean? Buster Douglas, good size and stuff like that. Now he's fighting guys 6'6", 6'7", 6'8".
Well, look at Chris Arreola. He was 6'4". He looked like a midget against some of these guys.
And you know what? Usyk is, 6'2"?
So Usyk, you're right. These guys he shouldn't be having his way.
But Usyk's style is... whereas he will mess up a Daniel Dubois because I don't think Dubois adjusts to his style.
But also he's mentally strong. You hit that before.
He's strong.
He's mentally strong.
And Anthony Joshua, man, what a phenomenal, physique, what a phenomenal presence. His last couple of fights when he's jabbing against Salinas and everybody else, he's beautiful. But if they test him, I want to see what he's got. Because he's another guy that, unfortunately, we haven't seen him in the top 3 of the heavyweight division.
The thing is that he doesn't do – these fighters, when they get hurt, they don't do what they should do, which is get out of harm's way. They want to go toe-to-toe and show them that they're not hurt. That was his weakness against Dubois. He shouldn't have tried to, when you're hurt, you don't go and try and attack the guy, get your head back.
What I tell fighters, I say, you don't get points for being a tough guy.
No.
I said, nobody tells you at the end of the fight, yeah, you got knocked out, but he's a tough guy.
He's a tough guy.
Yeah, and you know what? The belt goes to the other guy there, but, we got some interesting fights. But to your point, it's like, even back, if you go to the 76 Olympic team, the country was behind everybody. The country in boxing, when people get behind a fighter or country, a team, it changes the way
100%.
of you prepare and what you got to do. And I think
our amateur program is awful right now. That's why. I got to call some amateur finals in the state of Florida, and I was surprised at seeing some. As a matter of fact, Erickson Lubin was a guy that won, went on to the Nationals in Vegas, and now he's fighting for a title. But you said you worked with, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but that's me. I thought Deontay Wilder was a one-trick phony. I mean, he had unbelievable power, but he never used. He should have had a good jab. His footwork was terrible, and I don't think he should continue fighting. I think he's at this point where he's gonna be a vegetable because same result's gonna happen.
I mean, I saw him in camp before the Parker fight, and man,
He looks good.
Malik had him up on his toes, had him jabbing, had him moving.
Why doesn't he jab in fights?
I don't know what happened in that fight. I can't call it. When we left, he had starched my fighter a little bit, and you know what? I was like, man, this is a different Deontay Wilder. He's going to be a problem. I don't know. I mean, I think fighters sometimes it's hard to walk away from the game like any other athlete. And I think to your point before, we were talking about, certain fighters, Chevelle, they want that. They see what everybody's getting today. And you know what? You got to think about it, okay? And timing does pass us. Timing is everything in life, right? The right timing, anything can happen. These fighters, the money out there today, it's life-changing. Like,
I'll fight Jake Paul.
Listen, if someone offered you a fight later in your career and you didn't make that kind of money, let's call it 10, 20, 30 minutes, that's life-changing money, Billy.
100%.
Right? So, and for me, I'm an advocate for the fighter because, like we said, the fighter's the business. If I could be a part of it and my name gets attached to making a world champion, great. But at the end of the day, I want to see a fighter walk away being able to take care of himself, being able to take care of your family, because you put so much into the sport. So if you get the opportunity to fight for a big fight, okay, not that you got to take the fight because you owe so much goddamn money or you don't have anything or you're broke is no joke, but that you can take care of your family. And I think people are in better shape today.
100%.
They eat better. They eat better. If you're 50 years old, it's basically, if you're in shape, it's like you were 30.
Yeah, look at my man, John Carlo.
Yeah, John Carlo making the comeback. If you haven't been hurt as a fighter, if you weren't in the wars, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So like you got a little gas in the tank. So you get those factors. Another guy, you touched on it, right? Jake Paul. You know what? Another guy doesn't have to fight. He is set. He's got generational money.
Yep.
He is set. Give me your thoughts on him, because I kind of like to get boxing people who've been around the game thoughts about Jake Paul.
Well, first I want to touch on what you said. Mark Twain said it best. Too bad youth is wasted on the young. Every athlete, whether we're talking boxing, baseball, football, basketball, their mind knows what they needed to do and they wish they could have done. Right. Michael Jordan, in my opinion, the greatest basketball player ever to lace on a pair of sneakers, he played too long,
Yeah.
Football players do it all the time, and boxers too. They know what to do. The body just doesn't react the way it did when they're in their 20s and 30s. So I think that's a normal thing for those level athletes, something that I can't fathom because I was never, I played football in high school, but, that's as far as I went,
Right.
I boxed a little too, amateur, and like you, You know, I won some fights, and I fought 7 times. I won 6, I lost 1, and I said, I'm going to try something different,
Right.
you know. As far as Jake Paul goes, okay, Jake Paul is a great promoter. And I think that Jake Paul, should he decide to stay in boxing as a promoter, could potentially go down in history as one of the best promoters. As far as a fighter goes, I know he puts a lot of time in, and I know that he's worked hard at it. But in my opinion, I'm sorry to say that I don't classify him as a real fighter. And the reason is because, putting Mike Tyson aside, Mike Tyson had admitted that he was holding back.
Yeah.
And Tank Davis, you know.
He's selling sizzle.
That's what it is. But I think that it all boiled down to one fight with Jake Paul. And Jake Paul's only fight against a real fighter, not even a real good one, was Tommy Fury, and he lost. He's actually ranked in the top 15 by the WBA as light heavyweight. I think if Jake Paul beat a legitimate contender in any sanctioning body, if he beat a top 10 guy, then I would give him credit. I just don't see it happening.
I agree. Look, I give him credit for one thing. He trains hard.
He does.
He doesn't have to. He's done some great things, especially on the women's end. He's signing women talent, and he's going to box them off against each other. He's not protecting them. I'm an advocate of that. What he did with Netflix to bring boxing mainstream is genius.
40 million people saw that Crawford fight.
And what he's doing for boxing is he might be the guy that's going to get the not hardcore fans involved in boxing again because they want to see him.
You know what? I noticed something during the Canelo-Crawford fight that stuck out, and which I agree with you. The non-hardcore boxing fans, hopefully they'll tune in again and again and again. But the other thing I saw that I felt was promising was all the new sponsors. There was sponsors on that were involved with that. Now, granted, business is business, and they knew that there was going to be 40 million pairs of eyes watching it. But I thought that was a home run for the sport of boxing to have something other than, you know, the beer sponsor and the normal sponsors we see, you know. And one thing I didn't comment before, the UK, in my opinion, carries boxing on its back.
Yes.
And not only because the fighters are willing to fight each other, but I believe that the fans are more knowledgeable about the sport. They're not going to abandon their guy if he loses.
Listen, you go to the events, there's 70, 80,000 people in the stands constantly.
Diversified
diverse,
fans, too.
From
young kids, old people.
From different communities, different levels.
I love it.
You know, back to Jake Paul, people probably don't realize this. His first event was on a Sunday night in Cleveland. It was on Showtime, but he sold that place out. On a Sunday night. Billy, you know boxing is like, in Cleveland?
No, listen.
Come on.
Listen, generally, any holiday weekend is a no-no for the sport of boxing, you know. But Sundays, you're competing against, you know.
Yeah. But, you know, to your point, you know, we can sit here for 4 or 5 hours, you and I, probably make 20 segments. But we got to kind of wrap it up. Tell us where we can find you and your show. Tell us a little bit about your show. I know it's once a week on Facebook. Is it anywhere else? And, you know, where we can find you and watch your content.
We're actually on multiple platforms.
Okay.
Facebook, we do simulcast on Facebook, but YouTube is probably the most common one. Talkin' Boxing, TALKIN, no G, and then boxing. So YouTube /Talkin' Boxing. We're on Rumble. We're podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on. There's a couple other ones too.
Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Well, yeah, with all the podcasts, all
Yeah.
those. But I think we're on TikTok now, and there's another one Jeremy just told me we're on. So, yeah, I mean, you Google Billy C and boxing, and I'll pop up.
I mean, awesome having you here. I hope you come back again, that we can do this
Anytime.
again. there's just so much that probably we could touch. You know, Billy is, for people out there wanting to really learn the sport of boxing, I'm catching your show on Facebook. I try to catch a few minutes, especially if I'm in the car.
You got to stay in that chat room. I love when you're in
there.
there.
Yeah. Well, you know, and it's just because, like,
there's another coach in there too.
Yeah, but you got to listen to him if you really want to know the little ins and outs of boxing, because he's going to tell it like it is. It's not sugar-coated. It's coming from someone who's been around generations of the sport. So you're definitely going to learn something. You got some great guests. I saw you had Michael McKisson last week.
He was a character.
Yeah. And then, you know, last week.
I had Speedy Ellis last week.
Yeah,
ready.
I'm dropping my little interview with Rashidi today for his upcoming event. But you had the kid that fought Paulie Malignaggi on bare knuckle.
I had a kid that was on the card.
Oh, he wasn't the kid.
He wasn't.
Paul.
It wasn't.
Okay.
John. What was his name? Something John.
Yeah, I thought he was the kid that was fighting.
No. He made his pro debut, and they switched his last. Him and the opponent that he trained for.
Yeah.
They switched at the last minute, and they put two pro debut bare knuckle boxers, and they had this great fight, and it ended in a draw. That's something I'm starting to get interested in.
I tell you what, you be my guest in January. Come to Philadelphia. I got a kid fighting on Knuckle Mania at the Wells Fargo. Come down.
You let me know.
Okay. And
yeah, I like. It's a little
brutal. It's crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Brutal.
It's a crazy sport. But
I was shocked that Paulie did it.
Yeah, me too. I was, and then if you saw the results,
I saw the fight.
I know, and he
worked the body. No, I've never saw anyone else do that.
He was lumped up, and he had to sit in the hospital for almost 7-8 hours before they stitched him. Yeah, unfortunately,
he's got one more fight on that deal. I think.
Right? I like Paulie. I think he should just he should be a mentor, and you know, he's a great advocate for the sport.
Why doesn't he get into training?
You know what? I don't know. Paulie's a great story, man. It just, for a guy who's come so far on the sport, and you know what? I like the guy. I mean, I've been blessed to sit ringside with him, and he is what you see on TV. He just spews boxing. He just spews boxing. But, you know, Billy, I really appreciate you coming on Coach's Corner. You know, Billy Calogero, Talking Boxing. Check him out. Check his platforms out. You're really, really going to enjoy it if you want to learn about the sport of boxing. And Coach Dave McDonough from Coach's Corner Podcast, train hard, train smart, and we'll see you in the next round.